I don't know if it's everything going on in DC or a newfound energy from the warm weather, but I've been finding myself thinking a lot about ways to give back this spring. The District Bridges Community Navigation Program helps neighbors in need navigate the complex system of support programs in DC. Their small team literally walks the streets of DC, establishing relationships with people and connecting them to the services they need, housing, medical care, as well as education and employment resources. And you can help them out too. You can volunteer at the meal distributions coming up on April 10th and 23rd, or donate clothes or household items they can distribute. Follow District Bridges on Instagram at District Bridges to learn about other ways to get involved. Today is Monday, March 31st. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Mark, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me again, Michael. Always appreciate it.
Happy Monday.
Yeah.
So there is so much in this order, a lot of language, not a lot of clarity about what it all means. But can you sort of walk me through this? It creates this DC Safe and Beautiful Task Force. What does that mean?
Exactly. So first, the task force is defined by a group of representatives from federal agencies, and so there are, the most notable omission is the mayor or the council or any DC local representation whatsoever on this. So that's where we start. It says that the task force will report to the Attorney General about the progress it makes in several different, categories that are later mentioned in the executive order. And as you said, it's vague. It really doesn't describe the powers that the task force would have, if any, or are they going to be like Doge and can go in? It doesn't seem like that. It seems like this task force will be set up to kind of monitor and advise and coordinate between federal agencies and local DC agencies, particularly law enforcement. And so when you start getting to what they'll do, it's, getting tough on crime, surging police. When you look at the details in that, it's not just surging police citywide, crime citywide. It's hyper focused on places mostly that tourists and congressional and White House staff would be visiting and living. They call them public areas, but when they later define them, it's the National Mall, it's Lafayette Park, it's Union Station, Rock Creek Park, the GW Parkway, Suitland Parkway, Anacostia Park. These are all federal enclaves in and around the District of Columbia. So that's what it focuses on there.
It also says they're going to have more immigration, more ICE, and they're going to monitor DC's cooperation with ICE.
That's right, and monitor them as their sanctuary city status, right? And the House last week just passed through committee a markup legislation from Clay Higgins that would require DC to drop its sanctuary city regulations that are in place and force them to, particularly when people are in custody who do not have the proper documentation, that they would be reported to ICE. So there's a component to that. There's a component of getting rid of homeless encampments and graffiti on federal land. That's in there. There's a component on metro fare evasion. They want to crack down on that. Where it stops short is actually taking control and ordering, mandating that the district police must do this, must do that. It's basically, I look at this as a blueprint, kind of a warning shot. This is how I was describing it when it first came out, that it looked like a warning shot. Like, here's what I want the mayor to do. Here's what I want to see out of the city. I'm going to set up this task force to help coordinate and monitor on this to see that it gets done.
So there's some stuff in there that, I think the mayor would be very happy for help with, like getting the crime lab accredited, which we've talked about on our pod, helping MPD recruit and retain officers, which, she says is something she wants to do. But there's also expediting concealed carry licenses for so-called law-abiding citizens, which is very against what Washingtonians, at least according to their elected officials, want.
Absolutely. And look, I will say, it's cumbersome in the district to buy a gun because you can't buy it. Look, You and I were sitting in a room just the other day with the U.S. Attorney Ed Martin for his very first public appearance since taking over that position. And he was asked by the moderator of that panel, the U.S. Attorney charged with enforcing all of our gun laws, how many gun stores there are in Washington, D.C. And he was unable to answer that question. And it's a simple answer, zero. That's how many we had. And so it is cumbersome to buy a gun and to get the permits, particularly a carry permit in DC. But as you said, that's how the district government and district residents want it to be. And quite honestly, we don't hear a lot of people complaining about this. So I'm not sure why his focus on this. My guess is staff somewhere in the ecosystem of the White House ran into the cumbersome process and wanted to throw it in there. So, but again, some of it is micromanaging, but none of it is mandating the district to streamline that process.
What does it mean? I mean, we talked about DC voters pretty clearly want to make it hard or impossible even to concealed carry a gun in DC. Nobody responsible to those DC voters is actually on this task force, not the mayor, not anyone in the council. What does that mean?
It makes us question whether or not the district government will have real input on this, or again, if this is just a warning shot and a blueprint of like, hey, here's a roadmap of what we want to see you do, and we have this task force of federal entities. This walks right up to a control board, right, Michael? It wasn't too long ago we heard the president on Air Force One telling reporters that the federal government should take over control of the DC government, something he threatened several times on the campaign trail, but now has said it publicly as president of the United States. And so you have him making those threats and then putting this blueprint out. It was our good friend Tom Sherwood who earlier this year reported that there was sources telling him that they were considering making this czar position over public safety, this federal czar over public safety to monitor. Well, this is a step in that direction, right? This is a small step kind of pushing back at home rule, kind of dipping their toe in the water of the control board. Okay, we're not going to call it a control board. We're going to call it a task force. We're not really giving them authority just yet to do things, but they will monitor, coordinate, and then the most important thing I think in there is report back to the Attorney General the progress that they're making.
And I think that like you say, there is no formal control. And on one level, it's like, well, nothing's really changed. Like this city has seen task forces come and go. But the insulting tone, that this idea that Washington residents and their irresponsibility brought this on themselves, that's, I suspect, the thing that's really going to stick in people's craws.
Well, certainly if you read it, right, and it opens up with language that says, the capital city, the greatest nation in the world. And it talks about the city being the only city that is belongs to all Americans. That's the opening line. Washington, D.C. is the only city that belongs to all Americans. And so I don't know the subtext to that, but, this is, again, treating the District of Columbia differently than any other jurisdiction. And it is because Congress does have oversight and authority over the District of Columbia. But again, this is just, another tiny step pushing another crack in the wall of home rule.
Trump frequently talks about beautifying DC, beauty, beauty. Based on your reading of this executive order, what do they mean by beauty and beautifying?
Well, we know that the president doesn't like graffiti. We don't know exactly why, what graffiti he actually saw that kind of, was the tipping point for him. But we know he constantly mentions graffiti. He also mentions frequently homeless encampments, and he ties it to particularly foreign dignitaries who come in to visit him in Washington, D.C. And, his vantage of the district for the most part is the drive or the helicopter ride from Andrews to the White House. And that's the same for a lot of foreign dignitaries. They fly into Andrews, they motorcade in, and they go to the State Department. And he doesn't want them to see these homeless encampments. He doesn't want them to see particularly anti-Trump graffiti. You'll recall it was, it's been gone for a couple of months, for almost a year before the election and the inauguration. There was the Baby Trump mural painted on the side of a facility down near Rock Creek Parkway by the infamous Watergate Hotel and gas station there. And so don't know if he saw that, but that was certainly something on his commute.
They've also had a thing about street murals. Obviously, mayors agreed to tear up BLM Plaza,
Right.
but there's others around town. Is that a thing where they could be accused of pushing an ideology they don't like?
Well, look what they're doing at the Smithsonian, right? I mean, the executive order on Smithsonian displays. And so when you talk about, their ideology, yes, we did see something come down recently that spoke to street murals, plural, beyond just Black Lives Matter Plaza, which is in the process of being torn up right now, a concession that the mayor made to the president. So, we'll see what other streets they go after, if any.
They're taking the hobbits to DC? That's right, the stars of The Lord of the Rings, including Legolas, Gimli, and Samwise Gamgee, are bringing Middle-earth to the Walter E. Washington Convention Center at this year's AwesomeCon. Catch the stars of The Lord of the Rings, The Goonies, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and so many more of your nerdy favorites at this year's convention. There will also be tabletop gaming areas, retro arcade consoles, and so much more. The show runs April 4th to 6th. Buy your badges now at awesomecon.com. That's awesomecon.com.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. DC's theater scene is so underrated. You may have even heard our whole episode about all the great work happening on DC's smaller stages. And if you need another sign to tap into it, this is it. Mosaic Theater Company brings the DC premiere of Colored Water to the stage, spotlighting one of the most pressing social issues of our time, the right to safe, clean water. The play is set in Flint, Michigan, and follows a General Motors employee on the verge of a promotion when her sister's activism threatens to upend their family's stability. The play is powerful, poetic, and urgent, shining a light on Black women's resilience and environmental injustice. There is no better time to experience theater in DC. Colored Water runs at Mosaic Theater April 3rd through April 27th at the Atlas Performing Arts Center. Get tickets at mosaictheater.org.
This executive order also asserts that crime is near record high levels. It says that a bunch of times. And as a child of the 80s, I think that's not accurate. But can you fact check that for me?
So they dance around this. They acknowledge that, Democrats tout that crime is down. Right now, current crime trend is down, and it is significantly down right now in just about every category in violent crime overall. But what they do in this is they go back to pointing to the Biden years, right? That during the Biden years, crime in the district did go up. And this is a fact. I mean, the crime in the district did go up dramatically. I'm not sure that President Biden had a lot to do with that, but it did happen while he was president. Mayor Bowser was mayor. And now that trend is going down again and has been now for going on a year. And so that's a good trend. But when they talk about this crime trend, they go back to data that is a little bit out of date. Just like with the crime lab and accreditation, they make this sweeping characterization of a crime lab that is unaccredited. Well, that's a little outdated as well, because while it did lose its accreditation, it has regained some of that accreditation. And right now, I believe it's just firearms that they're unaccredited and that they have to outsource. So some of the language, some of the supporting documents with this executive order are just a little bit outdated and skew toward the Republican narrative.
So this order also, it calls out quote unquote failed policies. Is there anything else they're referring to there?
Well, look, the district government has always been painted as soft on crime by Republicans, particularly at the national level. And you'll go back to the crime bill, the omnibus crime bill that was put forward by Charles Allen a couple of years ago, that would have rewritten DC's complete criminal code, which is in desperate need of updating. It's completely antiquated. Everybody agrees about that. But they ran into some trouble, and the mayor was opposed to it because of a few items in it. The Republicans in the House painted it as soft on crime, and ultimately they blocked that legislation. And the Democratic president went along with that, overturning that and blocking that from taking effect. And so we're left with a lot of the DC code. It's interesting. The DC Police Union is mentioned in this executive order. And we know that the DC Police Union was strategic in pushing Congress to overturn that original crime legislation. And they have been very successful. The local DC Police Union has been very successful in painting a national narrative of the DC Council as being soft on crime, is particularly when it comes to juvenile justice. It talks about pretrial detention, right, in this executive order. And that has been something that they have been working to get tougher on. And this is something, again, we see Ed Martin, again, when you and I were at the event with him, that he spoke about pretrial detention being a tool that they need to take more advantage of.
So wait, one thing that jumped out at me from this was there was a reference, and it's this litany of mistakes that Washingtonians have allegedly made, that the city decriminalized cannabis. Now, does that signal that people are going to start getting locked up for marijuana possession again, or that these gifting stores are going to start getting busted?
Well, the gifting stores DC is cracking down on the gifting stores. I get a press release almost every day from the district government about another one of these shops that they have closed down. But without a doubt, it is not a stretch to imagine, and people have been concerned about this since he was elected, that there are a lot of local DC laws, amongst them the legalization and decriminalization. Actually, it's recreational marijuana is legalized in DC. You just can't buy it. Right. And so, again, when you look at some of the language in this executive order, it's either misinformed or outdated. And the mayor has made this point about the Trump administration that, in her words, Trump's perspective and prism that he views Washington, D.C. is skewed to a pre-pandemic and a pandemic era, when there were a lot more homeless encampments, when crime was much higher. And now, when he's back, his mindset is, and that of his administration is still kind of locked back there and is a few years dated.
One of the things that has struck me, not just with this executive order, but in general, I wrote a column dealing with this last week, is the astonishingly muted reaction of the city leadership to these things that are quite clearly insulting, and where there'd be some populist appeal and saying, like, hey, who the hell do you think you are? And that seems quite clear to me that this is because the city fears for home rule. They fear for their budget. They fear, that the executive branch has them by the short hairs. So this other thing that's going on right now is trying to get this budget fix through the House, which through sort of boneheaded legislating had created a continuing resolution that basically kept DC from accessing its own money, its own bank accounts. Trump on Friday puts up a post on Truth Social calling on the House to fix this, which is precisely what the mayor wants, and it's precisely an incentive to have the mayor stay mum on stuff that she might oppose. But as you were telling me, there's like a second half of that Truth Social post.
Yeah. So look, this post by the president was a gift to the mayor and the District of Columbia. It's exactly what they had been urging the White House to do and hoping the White House would do. Mike Johnson, the speaker, had actually said that he was waiting for public guidance from the president on this, whether or not to take up the Senate passed fix to this $1 billion budget cut that would just, in mayor's word, be devastating to the district's ability to provide public safety, schools, everything would have to be cut over the next 6 months. So this is great news that the president came out so forcefully. And he said in all uppercase, immediately, it should be passed. What the Senate passed should be taken up immediately by the House. I mean, the directions from the president for Mike Johnson could not be any more clear. The problem is when he follows up that statement, he says that he looks forward to working with Mayor Bowser, which he has been doing, and the mayor acknowledges they work together on these issues, as you pointed out, that they have common ground on, that he looks forward to working with the mayor to make the city cleaner and safer. But then he ends it with, if that doesn't happen, I will have no choice but to do it myself. That's how that social media post ends, with the president threatening once again to take control of the DC government. So you couple that social media post with the executive order, and I believe it's exactly as I said, that executive order and now this social media trust are a warning, a roadmap to Mayor Bowser and the DC Council. Here's what the president expects of you. Get it done, or he will do it himself. And now you have a task force that is charged with overseeing your compliance and your progress with this, that will report back to the executive. And the president saying, if it doesn't get done, he'll do it himself. It couldn't be more clear to me what he's threatening. Again, another chip away at home rule in the district.
So you're a City Hall reporter. I'm wondering, what kind of reactions have you heard from other people in city politics, members of the council, et cetera? Has anybody, Eleanor Holmes Norton put out a statement sort of saying this thing was insulting and being quite critical. What are you hearing from council members, from people who might ordinarily ding the mayor?
Yeah, again, I think we're hearing, people are tempered in their responses. And I will say the mayor and the chairman and the attorney general, who we know now meet every week in person to discuss a coordinated strategy with responding to the White House. And I know there's been reporting that the mayor has and the chairman have, urged the council also to temper their responses, because as you pointed out, look, they're walking this tightrope with the president. They don't want to pick a fight where they don't have to. And so far, that strategy has been working, right? It may not seem like that because the district has lost Black Lives Matter Plaza. They're, going over homeless shelters, without giving the proper notice that they normally give because the president says so. But every day that the mayor wakes up and is still mayor of the District of Columbia, and there's still complete home rule, and the chief is still in charge of the police department, the district is winning, because we know what could happen if it goes south. And it would not take much for the district to lose control of the police department altogether, or to lose control. Look, all of us were alive, you and I were alive during the control board, right? So we know that's a reality, that can happen, that the control board never went away. It's just dormant. The president can bring it back if he so chooses. And it really seems like that's what he's threatening once again.
So in that spirit, if they're saying that their accommodations and collaborations and not taking shots at the president has worked, we know this executive order went through a whole bunch of iterations. The one that they finally put out is less intense, reportedly. Do you know anything about the previous iterations, and what or more importantly, what are your sources inside the city administration saying about whether this shows that they've that their strategies worked?
Well, look, I would say if the House passes the Senate version of the fix to the $1 billion budget cut, then it's working, right? Then that shows that it's working, because that's only happens because the president used his muscle to get that done. And that's a huge thing. The mayor's office, there's only so much, it's like a fire hose coming at them. There's only so much that they can do. And that $1 billion budget cut, that was the biggest thing there. This executive order and wanting to clear encampments and beef up police in certain areas and whatnot, I'm guessing the district leaders will be happy to comply with that if it means they keep their authority And now they keep this $1 billion that they were about to lose. So they have to pick their battles. And, look, let's not forget what's hanging in the balance of this. We're going into a budget season where they're going to have to cut a different $1 billion, an additional $1 billion over the next 3 years at a time when the mayor wants to bring the Washington Commanders. And, my understanding is that they're very, very close to a deal with the Commanders. But fiscally, there's a roadblock. And the first one was this $1 billion in the short term. And so being able to have that win and some smaller battle losses, I'd say overall, the strategy they probably think is working.
Hey, Mark, thank you so much for being here.
Mike, I really appreciate you having me. Thank you.
And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. We are working around the clock here. If our work has helped you understand DC better in this moment, consider becoming a member. Go to membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.